To start. Yep, so I'll hand over to Peter now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Taylor. I'm the Acting Director of Systems Funding and Cards. First, I'll just kick off with the acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land which we're gathering today and pay my respects to those past, present, and emerging. I'm here in Sydney on Gadigal land. So welcome to the online info session for the NGO flood recovery grants. This is for the closed competitive grant applications. Today, as Dan said, he's the manager of grants design and support for projects. He'll be taking you through the who, what, when, where, why, and how to apply for the program. This is obviously in response to the floods happening in last year, the end of last year in central and western New South Wales, something close to my heart as I grew up in some of those regions. So it's, for critical support for the most vulnerable in those communities for floods. It's here to help a community-led recovery in those areas. I'm sure you're all well aware of that. That's me done. I'll be in the background, but I'll hand it over to Dan's more than capable hands now to take you through all the ins and outs of the program. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Peter. Sarah, are you okay to move it to the next slide? So yeah, as Peter said, I'm the manager of the grants design and projects team. We're the ones who manage this grant program. I'll get through the sort of official boilerplate first. So the Commonwealth and New South Wales governments have launched a $9.1 million grant program to support communities to recover from the central and western New South Wales floods that commenced in August, September 2022. Of course, we know that's just when the floods commenced. The flow-on effects continued through into, I think, right through to about January, but we are talking about that flood period, that flood event there. The NGO Flood Recovery Program is open to NGOs, Aboriginal organisations, community organisations and DCJ service providers that provide human services. The emphasis there is human services. All of you would already across this anyway. You do provide human services, but this is just making the point that this isn't available also to NGOs who, provide environmental support or support for animals. This is very much directed only to NGOs who provide support to people. These human services must be provided to individuals, families and communities in the LGA's designated disaster areas under AGRN 1030 and 1034 in the DCJ districts of Western, Murrumbidgee, Far West and New England. Of course, don't expect you to know anything about what AGRN 1030 and 1034 are. That's just the official government designation of when places were marked out as disaster areas. The main important information is this on the right, which is the LGAs that are covered. So these 59 LGAs are the LGAs that this grant is available to. So to get a grant here, you have to provide services to people located in these locations, one or more of these locations. The NGO Flood Recovery Program is based on the successful Northern New South Wales NGO Flood Support Program model, which was launched last year in response to the February floods in Northern New South Wales. Some of you may have some connections to or be yourselves involved in work in Northern New South Wales, and so you may be aware of that program, which is coming to its conclusion now. This is a new program that's focused entirely on just the August, September floods and those who are facing the effects of them afterwards. Sarah, could you go to the next slide, please? So getting down to brass tacks, what does the NGO Flood Recovery Program actually do? The idea is that it provides one-off grants to NGOs and Aboriginal organisations to help address the difficulties you're experiencing, meeting increased demand for core services as a result of the floods, addressing the need for new services that may have sprung up in relation to the floods. And by that I mean, if your NGO has started providing new services due to the flood events, whether it's everything from running a food bank to just making changes to your normal services, that's covered there, and also managing the impact of the floods on staff and volunteers. We know that that's a big impact. That was a real learning from Northern New South Wales as well, which was that you ramp up your staffing and your volunteering, everyone gets quite burned out, and then you're still having to provide services day on day after day. And so some hope is that some of these grants will help in that. In the Northern New South Wales, for example, there were a number of cases where people who had previously been volunteers started receiving a wage, or people were given more hours who'd been really realistically already working those extra hours. So those are some of the opportunities. If you're in this session, that means you're a closed competitive grant invitee. That means that you are actually identified by your local district as a service that is an area which may have been affected by floods and will be facing extra services, and so you're invited to apply for a closed competitive grant. Those closed competitive grants are limited to DCJ funded service providers who are invited to apply. So if you receive that email with closed competitive grant in the header, that means you. Grants range from 50,000 to 100,000, and you would see the email that you've been designated a figure. That's purely based not on your need, but it's a proportion of your current ongoing DCJ funding. And the total funding pool available in that pool is $1.1 million. That said, this does not mean that you are precluded from also instead receiving an open competitive grant. So there's also another stream which is open. It's open to any NGO who works in those areas. It's a bigger pool of money available, $6.5 million. And the grants available also range more widely. They range from $10,000 to $200,000. The reason why you're eligible for both is because we didn't want anyone who was identified through the closed competitive grant program to be disadvantaged. So the idea is that when you make your application, you are making an application in a sense for both. So you're automatically being assessed for a closed competitive grant and also for an open competitive grant. If it turns out one is more competitive than the other, or that there's more funds available in one pool than the other, then your organisations won't be disadvantaged. And when you go into the application form itself, you'll see that you get a space to tick and say, yes, I was invited for a closed competitive grant, and this is the amount of money that I was offered. But you also get a chance to tick, and if I was to instead receive an open competitive grant, I would like to apply for X number of dollars, whether that's, and I think that rate, the 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, or 200,000. How you actually apply is using Smarty Grants, an online form that you online grant management platform, and it has a form which you can stop, save, and come back to as often as you like. You can even preview a copy of the form first, and that's the link for the form there. You can also obviously get a link to the how to apply from, I believe, in that original email, but also from the general DCJ NGO recovery program website, which is listed at the bottom of every one of these slides. At the end of this session, after we get through this presentation and there's time for questions, for those of you who haven't had much experience applying through Smarty Grants before, or would just like a bit of a preview of what the form involves, Ella from my team will be doing a full run through of the form, how you go through and apply, just to familiarise yourself with how it all works. Sarah, if you can go on to the next slide. Some of the features of this grant program that make it unique. Firstly, it's not project-based. So we aren't asking you to create a new program or propose a new program or project that you want to now deliver with this new grant funding. This funding is intended to help you meet the increased demand for your current services, whether they're services you're always funded to receive through DCJ or extra services you put on in relation to the floods. On that basis, it makes the application process a fair bit more simple because you're not having to create a new project, design it, work out when everything's going to happen. The idea is more that you'll support your continuing services. As part of that, applying and reporting is easier. The application form and reporting requirements are much simpler than you would have seen in other grant programs being offered by DCJ or by, frankly, any other state government or Commonwealth agencies. It's much simplified, and that's to allow you flexibility to tailor service to the needs of your local communities without being too locked into what you've put in your application form. It also reflects the fact that we know you're all struggling. We know all NGOs are always struggling with staffing time and volunteer time to make these kind of applications and to do the ongoing reporting, and we want to make the impact on you as little as possible. Part of that is that this does not require a detailed budget or project plan. As I said, it's not project based, so we wouldn't expect you to create a project plan with here's when we're going to deliver this, here's when we're going to deliver this, here's when we're going to deliver this. Instead, you're providing a 200-word summary of what you intend to use with the dollars should you be successful in applying for them. And then you provided a really basic estimation of costs in a proposed expenditure table, which is a fancy way of saying it's a budget, but we don't want to call it a budget because we're not asking you to provide the level of detail you would usually provide in a budget. We don't want to know that you're intending to spend $13,620 on stationary admin costs, etc. We're just looking for large ballpark figures of how you're intending to spend the money. So it could be something like we're applying for $50,000, and we think it'll be roughly $30,000 of this will devote to staffing to employ someone. We don't need an exact figure. And the reason we're asking for these round figures is because we want to give you a little flexibility down the track so that when if something changes 6 months down the line and you need to slightly adjust where you're spending your money, you don't have to constantly come back to us and ask us for permission on how you can make those adjustments. You can make those adjustments yourselves without having to sort of get our sign off. That does lead into the flexibility. That is really what this grant program is about, is providing something that's very flexible for you so that if you are successful and you do receive this grant, you have some flexibility on how you're able to spend it. And you're not locked in by what you thought you need in August 2023 when you're looking at something in March 2024. And then probably the biggest difference between this and other grant programs is the level of ongoing support that's provided, as well as my team, who are based in Sydney. There are also local flood support officers on the ground who'll be in regular contact with you through the life of your grant. It means that we can ask you for less ongoing reporting because they can sort of just check in and see how things are going, but they can also provide ongoing support, help you network with other organisations. If you have a problem in one area, they might be able to point you to other government resources you can tap, or because they've been talking to other people who've received grants, they might be able to point you to another organisation who can help you with something like that. And that's happened a lot in the Northern New South Wales programs, which has been a real happy success. And later on, you'll get to meet a couple of the people who've already been put into those positions. So down to assessment requirements. For this grant program, you have 5 assessment criteria, same ones you'll see in the grant program. They are: 1, demonstrate there is an increased demand for your services; 2, have the capacity to meet the increased demand for your services based on your current resources, but also on the money you're applying for; 3, have the capability to deliver high quality, flexible and sustainable services. As you can see, that's fairly similar to the one above. So the focuses there are that the services are high quality, flexible and sustainable. 4, demonstrates an ability to understand and respond to the changing needs of your local communities. We know you're all locked into your local communities, but that's what we're assessing against there. And then the final one is able to fully expend the grant by September 2024, because these are one-off grants. And I should be really clear on this. This is an addition to your normal ongoing funding. You will report on it separately. It won't be part of the annual accountability, and it will only be for 12 months. So for each of those statements, rather than we assess those against, for each one of those assessment requirements, you'll be asked to provide 200 words, up to 200 words. And that's it. As far as how we assess the program, that's what we assess it against. We're not asking for supporting documentation, extensive project planning, extensive explanation of what you do. We know you do good work. That's why DCJ funds you, and we don't need you to prove that to us. We're really looking at what you could covering off these assessment requirements, and that's it. Sarah, could you go to the next slide, please? Some of the other features that pop up, one rarity in relation to this compared to other grant programs is if you've applied, you know that usually you can't get reimbursement of costs you've already incurred. That's usually a real no-no with grant programs. In this case, because we know that this grant program's not exactly rolling out exactly straight after the floods occurred, and we know that costs have been incurred from the day they happened on, we up to 25% of the funds you apply for can be just directly applied to reimbursement of costs you've already incurred. So you won't need to explain, in that proposed expenditure table, you'd probably put reimbursement hyphen staffing, reimbursement hyphen something else, and that would cover it. You wouldn't need to provide any further details to us than that. So that means that 25% of the grant is pretty much set aside for that, should you choose to take it up on that. Second thing is subcontracting. Obviously that's DCJ language. Some of you would know it better. I know I do from back in my day in NGOs. It's like auspicing. It's very similar to that. If your organisation is formally partnering with another organisation or individual providing assistance in relation to the floods, you can subcontract part of the services to them, which means that you can then pass some of the funding on to them. That includes reimbursement if they've already been assisting you before the moment that you've sent in your application. It's one of those things that we're setting out here, but no more complicated than it appears on the face of it. It is a case of, if it's part of your services that you're working with other organisation in relation to it, you just provide us with the details in the application form, and that's completely fine. Last point for here is no more than one application per organisation will be approved. And as I said before, you can use that one application form automatically. It applies you for both the closed competitive and open competitive grants. The only way you won't be considered for an open competitive grant is if you tick the box saying that for whatever reason, and I can't imagine what reason that would be, I would strongly suggest against ticking this box, but you can tick a box that says, please don't consider me for the open competitive grants, only consider me for the closed competitive. Otherwise, that's what you do. But it is true that you can only apply once on behalf of your organisation. So there aren't many in this call, but there are some organisations who, obviously operate in different areas and have different offices. It can only be one application per organisation. If for some reason, one part of your organisation applies here and then another part of your organisation applies, we will assess both, we will only award. So it is very much a limit that it's one application per organisation. Go to the next slide, Sarah. What funding can't be used for? Really highlighting this because there's a lot of things here that are ruled out from funding. Firstly, this is probably pretty obvious, you can't apply for funding for something that's already covered by another government grant or insurance payment, for example, replacement of items lost or damaged in the floods. That's pretty much the case for all grant programs, but particularly in the case of this one, because it's a Commonwealth requirement as well as a New South Wales state requirement that if there's another grant program that you've applied for, even if you haven't gotten a result on it yet, you can't apply for exactly the same thing for this. Happily, the things that you can apply for through this grant program generally don't really cross over much with the other grant programs out there. So it shouldn't be too much of an issue, but just bear that in mind. One of the things that can't be used for is temporary accommodation arrangements for your organisation. So you can provide support to your clients if they've got needing assistance in relation to that, but you can't do it for yourself. You can't take we can't put part of the payment towards the fact that you've been displaced from your usual office and you're now working somewhere else. You can't use funding for any infrastructure or equipment or vehicle or assets. The Northern New South Wales one was slightly more open than this, but the Commonwealth requirements are very strict. So you can't use funding for any equipment at all. It really is all about bluntly staffing costs and providing support to individuals are the two main things that most people ended up using their money for. Also, like transport costs in relation to rental of vehicles or stuff like that. Something like that's relevant, that's fine. But yeah, you can't use it to purchase assets. Can't use it for commercial activities. I think that's probably pretty straightforward. Can't use it for existing debts or budget deficits incurred prior to the floods. Again, pretty straightforward. Costs not related to service delivery, again, probably pretty straightforward. If you do have, we do get applications usually often which have things about, wanting to, for example, attend conferences with the money, or that's not going to be relevant. Training depends on the training. If there's training that's really directly relevant to providing ongoing support to individuals who are affected by the floods, that might be fine, but broader training probably isn't going to be. You can't provide funding towards support services provided to individual communities that do not live in the eligible LGAs. That's a pretty strict requirement. So we saw that list of 59 LGAs on the first page of this presentation. Also on our website, you can go to links to find those LGAs. The services have to be limited to people who live in those LGAs. That's a very strict Commonwealth requirement on us that we have to use when we're looking at it. I would note, however, we're not going to ask you to start taking the postcode of every person who walks through your door. So, as long as the services are provided in a way that's arguable that you're providing it to individuals or communities in those LGAs, you'll be covered. So you're not running a risk that somebody walks through your door and they lie to you about where they're from, or they happen to come in from wherever. As long as it's clear that the services you're providing are directed towards those people in those eligible LGAs, and that is the focus, and it's clear in any materials you'll produce or whatever, that's where the service will be provided, then that's absolutely fine. Can't use funding for interstate or overseas travel. That's strict in one sense, but there is some flexibility that if you are one of those people who are living fairly close, your organisation is fairly close to the border, and you're having to travel across the border because you have another office over there, or there's another service you work with that's over there, that's not a problem. Like if that's part of your thing for petrol costs and stuff, that would be a problem. We're more talking here about flights and accommodation and that kind of thing. And lastly, vouchers, for example, phone, store, internet credit. Unfortunately, that's the again, it's a bit of a common requirement. So if you're part of the support you'll provide to people who have been affected, you're paying with vouchers for things. This program. And Sally, Sarah, sorry, could you move to the next slide? So yeah, so here we are towards the end of the actual presentation itself. We just wanted to get across the main bits of information, the bits that make it different to other grant programs. As you can see here, the main place to find information is the website, dcj.nsw.gov.au/ngo-flood-recovery-program.html. That's the same link that appeared in all your emails, appears in the guidelines, etc., as well as copies of the guidelines and basic information. There's also a link to an FAQs page, which answers a lot of the frequently asked questions that we've been asked for this and the next one. And we'll also likely update that halfway through, and we'll let you know if we update that FAQs. My team is the SBC Grants team. We're based in Sydney or out of Parramatta. I might just get the people in my team to put on their cameras for a second and give you a wave. So I've got Ella, Denise, Sally, and Sarah. Waving to you as we speak. I would swear to you that Sarah's would be waving to you if it wasn't for the fact her camera's playing up. So we're here to answer questions anytime. Any email sent to sbcgrantsteam@fax.nsw.gov.au come to my email inbox and all four of their email inboxes as well. And we're really here about providing support. We really want to help you in any way to answer the queries. If you've got something that's bugging you in the back of your mind, you're not sure about, we don't want you to spend hours trying to think, oh, should I apply for this? Or what do they mean by this? Reach out to us and ask. To the extent that we can, we will answer every question as fulsomely possible, including what we're looking for in any particular question, that kind of thing. And we will get back to you as quickly as we possibly can. Unless we're all in a meeting together, there's usually one of us at least who will get an email and be able to respond to you fairly quickly. As I said before, one of the nice features of this grant program is that we're able to engage local support officers living in the regions. So at the moment, we have Mandy Godwin, who's living in Bathurst, and Annabelle, who lives in Wagga. So they're locally based. We're going to get people on board fairly soon from New England and Far West as well. Mandy and Annabelle, I think you might have your cameras on already if you want to give a wave. These are our lovely, friendly people from our local support officers. They're going to be engaged through the life of the grant. So they're sitting in DCJ offices locally. They're working under local CMP managers that you've probably dealt with already. And they're going to be on board, on hand to answer any of your questions. And during this period, the application period, they can provide you with that kind of like support in writing your application. They can't sit down at the computer and write it for you, but they can really talk you through it. And whether it's Annabelle and Mandy or my team, we are more than happy to, get on an MS Teams chat, share screen and, go, oh yeah, this is the problem I'm having. I'm trying to get questions about this. We're really happy to drill down to that level of detail. We don't want anyone here to die wondering, thinking, oh, is it worth me making this application? Is it, do I know how to answer this question? Reach out to us and ask. Like that's literally what we're here for. And we really, this isn't, what's the phrase? This isn't paying lip service. Like this is really, we're really keen to provide that level of support to you. We want to get the most applications in as we can. We have some funding available for this, and we want to get it out to those of you who need it the most. On top of that, some of you might have already been in contact with your New South Wales Reconstruction Authority regional delivery team in relation to this. They're all across this program as well, and they should be able to provide you with some advice if you prefer to reach out to them. It's well and truly up to you. And I should note that if you do reach out to us and we realise that Mandy and Annabelle are better placed to, provide you with some support directly and spend more time with you, we can talk to them directly as well. We're all on the same Teams chat and we're talking to each other constantly anyway. The only thing that you probably shouldn't reach out to us for is the kind of, I can't find my password, I tried to save and something disappeared, that kind of thing. We're not, unfortunately, IT tech wizards, but Smarty Grants actually does have a really good help page that you can see the link for there. They have an 03 number you can contact them for assistance, and happily, unlike most places you contact with assistance, I call them fairly regularly and they're really quite responsive and they can answer your questions really quickly. I would say, however, it leads into the obvious thing of we often have things where people, are applying for their grant at the last possible moment. So that'll be Friday, the 1st of September. And so they'll contact us at 4:45 when it closes off at 5 and say, oh my God, something's gone wrong. It's all disappeared. Don't put yourself in that position. We're not easily placed for this to be able to provide extensions. We can only provide extensions really in the case of an emergency. So the deadlines are pretty firm. So if you do, if you can get onto this a bit earlier than that last day, so that if anything crops up at the last moment that you have problems with, you're not stressing out and we're not stressing out. We can all just work together to sort it out. So I know that's a very quick whip through of like the program, and I hope some of you had a glance at the guidelines anyway. But that's sort of the overlook of the whole thing. So what we'll do now is we'll open up the floor for if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can put your hand up, or you can just start speaking, whatever you prefer. We'll go through those now, and then after this, we'll go through the presentation. Ella will take you through just the process of what it looks like to apply through the Smarty Grants portal, so you'll get a sense there of how it all works if you haven't done that before, or if you just want to get a bit of a glimpse of the application. So does anyone have any questions they want to throw in? Yes, Michelle.
Oh, hi. I did receive an email with an amount that we're sort of directed to apply for. We have 7 different contracts statewide with DCJ, and I'm just wondering, like, for that amount, are we able to spread it across those towns that are within the 1034?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, all of the amounts you've been nominated were very arbitrarily based on like the amount of your DCJ funding in all districts. But actually, no, so I should say in these 4 districts. So it is a pretty arbitrary number. We know that. But yes, you can use that to apply your application. You should put in one application based on, as long as your services are within those LGAs, and as long as you're talking about services to people who've been affected by the floods, then we're absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Fran.
Thank you. So I understand like the closed tender part. So like I've had a look and I've been working through my application. And you're right, it's not like it's been great because I've only had to have like 200 words, etc. So I understand the closed part when you're being assessed. But when it goes back then over to the open, with not having to supply evidence, like how does that, when it goes then at an open level to get assessed, is it the person that's wrote the best 200 words? Like how do you like go back and go, well, how do you validate that that's actually been the true, like in a community, that person has been the one that's actually had the increased workload?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a combination of things. So on the final assessment panel, we'll have representatives from DCJ, all the 4 DCJ districts, so people who are local, and we're really aiming for getting people who like genuinely live or operate locally. And then we've also got representative from Reconstruction Authority, and they're able to provide us with more detail in relation to physically where the locations are, where the places are still facing ongoing need. There's always a chance as well that after you send in your application, if the panel looks at it and has a question, we might reach out to you and say, oh, we just wanted to check on this. We weren't sure about this. And we know that sometimes when you've got those 200-word limits, it can be quite a challenge to get in what you want to get across. But yeah, that's the way we would work from there.
Oh, primarily. Perfect. No, thank you.
No worries. Anyone else got any questions? Excellentio. That's good. Yeah, our intention with this, I know we've blocked out an hour for it, but always our hope is that we'll give you some time back in your day. We mainly just want to leave enough time so that if there were a lot of questions, we could get through them all. And there will be, I should note, you will receive a video recording of this probably early next week, as well as a copy of the presentation itself. And there is a second sessions that will be happening on the 17th of August, but the content will be pretty similar to this. So there might be other people in your team you want to come along, but probably for you yourself, you'll feel a bit bored because it'll be very similar. So if there's no more questions immediately, and you'll get another bite of the cherry at the very end, I might hand over to Ella to do a bit of a take through of the actual form itself.
Hey guys, so I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. Can you see that? I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay, so you would have received the email inviting you to apply for the closed competitive grant, and you can click on this link here and that'll take you straight to the application form in Smarty Grants. Or you can click on this link and that'll take you to the flood grants landing page, which is this one here. And this page just gives you in-depth detail about the grant. And so if you scroll down halfway, you've got the links to the FAQs and the guidelines, and this link here will take you to the Smarty Grants launch page. So before you begin, as it says here, you want to make sure that you just read all these instructions. And before you start, you can also preview the form or download a preview of the form. And downloading a preview of the form is actually really handy. It's a great option if you want other people in your org to give you input or feedback on how to reply to questions. So you can print off, a few copies of the form, the application form, and share them with people in your org. And you can then combine the responses into your application form. That's just an option. You don't have to do that. But if we go here, click on Start a Submission. So here it will tell you if you haven't registered for Smarty Grants before, you're able to do that here. Just follow the prompts. If you have registered with Smarty Grants, all you got to do is put in your credentials, then log in. And so the first page will give you an overview of the program. And one of the most important things to note on this page, as Dan's also mentioned before, is it's got our email address. So, that's really good if you have any questions at all about the application process. It doesn't matter how small the query is, just please reach out to us. We're more than willing to help support you with the application process. As we know, grant applications can be quite daunting, so don't ever hesitate to reach out. And also at the bottom here, you've got the your application submission number. So I'd take a note of that. Just write it down or keep it handy. If you do get in touch with us, we'll probably always request that you have this number here, reference number. That way, it's just easy for us to find your application in the system. So next page. So this is where you pop in your organisation information. Pretty straightforward. And this bit here, so this is important. So you would have received an email invite from us to apply for the closed competitive grant. So you want to make sure you click yes here and not no. And also the amount in the invite for how much you were invited to apply for. Click one of these. Then the rest of this page is very straightforward. So you're just putting in your bank account details, organisation contact details. Here is where you put in your district and what LGAs you'll be delivering the services in. If you are subcontracting, you would say yes or no here. If it's yes, then you just want to pop in the subcontracting details here. And then the last question section on this page is just your PLI, public liability insurance. So just attaching a copy of that here. So the next page is service delivery and funding details. So that it starts off with just your where you answer how you're planning on using the funding. And then down here is your closed competitive grants versus open competitive grants. Again, this is an important little section here. You can choose whether you would like your application to be assessed for both closed competitive and open competitive, or you can just keep it as closed competitive only. So yeah, we've designed that to, you know, give closed competitive grant invitees the best chance of successfully obtaining a grant. But if you wish, you can opt out and only be considered for a closed grant. That's a closed competitive grant. That's entirely up to you. And then this is the assessment criteria bit where you get asked your 5 questions. So each question has a hint underneath each question. And so it's just really good, you know, to read the hint here because it will just give you information of what is required in your answer for each question. So each hint has a nice little description there for you to help you. And then we go down to expenditure. So these are the things that cannot be used for, just acknowledging that. The reimbursement, as Dan was saying, up to 25% of the funds you request can be used for reimbursement costs for any of the flood costs your organisation has accumulated since August, September 2022. So if you would like to, you know, claim any reimbursement costs, just make sure you pop that in your expenditure table. So the expenditure table, we've got here what you need to be including in it. But I just, you know, want to make it clear that you just keep it as high level as possible. There's no need to go into too much detail with this. This is, you know, as Dan mentioned, due to the flexibility of the funding. And pop your amounts in on this column here. And then just make sure that your expenditure total matches up with the amount that you're requesting. And then the last page is the applicant declaration page. And with the applicant declaration, you're just putting in the details of 2 people who will be signing the grant funding agreement if you are awarded funding. So that can't be, you know, just anyone in your org. They must be authorised signatories. So you can look up more info around authorised signatories at this link here if you're unsure of who that might be in your org. And then further down, just these bits here. If you want someone else in your org to review the grant funding agreement, you can pop their name in here, and that's optional. You don't have to do that. And then just agree with the above declaration. Next page. So before you submit your application, it won't let you submit unless you've answered all the mandatory questions. So just please ensure that, you know, you look before you submit. I mean, it won't let you submit it in anyway, but just go in and answer all the questions that are highlighted in red. And then you're good to submit your application. And yeah, I just, you know, can't stress enough. If you have any queries at all, don't hesitate to email us. The email once again is spcgrantsteam@facs.nsw.gov.au. And that's about it from me. I'll stop sharing. Thank you and good luck.
Thanks so much for that, Ella. Appreciate it. And so yeah, so that's the process for applying. As you can see, it's relatively simple. I know we're just hammering home the support message again and again and again and again, but I'm just going to hammer it home one more time. Please do reach out to us if you have anything here. We've gotten a couple of feedbacks, people thinking that it's deceptively simple, that there's some sort of trick here or there's something that they're missing. No, there isn't. There's nothing that we don't have any secondary little considerations that we have underneath our hats that we're not telling you about. It is what it appears like on the tin. The whole idea of this is to simplify the process both for application and reporting, and to provide you with extra support, because whether it's, we've got this experience now, whether it's like in response to COVID, in relation to Lismore floods, bushfires before that, a lot of the people in my team and the people who designed this have come from the NGO sector ourselves. We know that everyone is time poor, and that everyone is, and often the finding the time and the resources to putting towards doing applications is difficult. And then when you're successful in getting a grant, and then you suddenly realize, oh Lord, now I need to have somebody who sets aside a certain amount of time every month or 6 months or whatever to do extensive reporting, is going to be locked into that. We've really tried to simplify the process as much as possible. The reporting that you're required to do for us is fairly similar or akin to that application form in level of detail. The Commonwealth does have certain audit requirements where they can surprise with an audit, but that really is an audit of us rather than of you. But we may come to you and ask you for more details. But the nice thing about the high level information you provided in the application form means you can't be caught out later. Like, in the sense that, like, if you put in your application form, and I've been hit by this when I was working at NGO, you put in your application form, you're going to spend an X dollars amount on staffing, and then for one reason or another, you don't realize the increment's going to go up quite that amount, or somebody leaves and somebody leaves and you've got a month with no one in the position, the dollar amount changes, and then you go back and say, oh, it's different, and you need to provide an explanation why. The reason we're asking for high level information here is so that you haven't provided so much detail at the start, so therefore that when we come back to you about reporting, you're just saying, well, we thought it was going to be roughly this amount, and it did turn out to be roughly this amount. That said, if there are substantive changes that, if you're successful in obtaining a grant and there are substantive changes you need to make down the line, those can be run by us and approved, and that can be done through an email backwards and forwards process. And again, our experience, particularly with the Northern New South Wales floods, has been that will come up, because that's the nature of working in NGO firstly, and certainly if you're acting in an area where the needs change as vulnerable people can become more or less vulnerable, I suppose, the nicest way to put it. You can come to us and talk about that, and it won't be, as long as it's not funding that's not available, like as long as it's within the permitted uses of funding, we're usually going to be pretty flexible about that. So yeah, so apologies for bombarding you with a lot of information in a very short period of time. If you need to reflect on it later, you will get a recording of this, but as I said, you can always come to us with any questions. For example, just before we do log off and give you back 15 whole minutes in your day, in your diary, did anyone have any last minute questions or queries, concerns? Michelle? Oh, you're still on mute. I'm glad I'm not the only one who's still doing this. Good.
Sorry, Daniel. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Daniel, I know that you said that it was a project-based. I'm just wondering if there's capacity in this grant that would cover, say, a community resilience event or something.
Generally, we've had questions about event before. Usually, to be honest, they're less tied into being directly relevant. And the usual answer is it's increasing services and maintaining those increased services over that period. It's about like the fact that you've already had to do increased services, so therefore this is covering that. My suggestion would be that there might, if it's really closely tied into if you're talking about a resilience event for local communities, it might sort of fit as something that you would have planned to do already, and therefore it is part of what you're already planning to do in the next year, and we're now going to be able to support it. If it's a brand new event that's sort of being, in a sense, created or planned in response to this opportunity, then it's probably not going to get across. So it's probably comes down a little to how you word it in your application, but and it might be something that if you get a bit more thing, you can run by us if you want a bit more of a clarification on that. But yeah, I'd say general terms for everyone. If you're thinking about things like events, it's generally not going to be a great thing. But if it is something that it's really easily, clearly tied into ongoing work you're already doing, then it might be more likely to get across the line. Or you might decide, and probably putting my NGO hat on rather than my government hat on here, that you can, when you're applying for things, you can always think, well, I need support over here because that frees up some of my spending that I can then spend over here. So sometimes that could be a handy way of looking at things. If you're thinking about like this, usually when you're doing grants, the first thing they tell you is you can't put money towards your core services. That's verboten. This one's a very rare one where you can say, well, we had to put on increased services, or we've had increased things, so therefore we're putting the money towards that. So that's money going into sort of your core in a sense, which might free up money that you weren't planning to have free in the following financial year. This is not legal or financial advice. I want to make that very clear. But I think you probably could get a sense of what I'm alluding to there.
Yeah, okay. That's great. Thanks, Daniel. I appreciate that.
No worries. Did anyone else have any other questions? Great. Well, you know where we are. So like you can contact us to those email addresses. We can also get you in contact with those local support officers if you want to talk to someone who's a bit closer to the ground. They've obviously got a lot more understanding of your local experience than we do, based in our ivory tower in Parramatta. But you know, we could always put you in contact with them through us as well. So yeah, if we're at that, I'll leave it there, give you 12 minutes back in your lives. Thanks so much for coming, really appreciate it. And yeah, by all means, reach out if you have any queries or questions coming up, and those other sessions are down the track, and you will get video recordings and a copy of this presentation. Probably, I'm hoping Monday. Sometimes we have to send it to somebody to then put it onto YouTube and then send it to you. So it might take a moment, but hopefully we'll have that sorted by Monday. Lovely. Thank you all. Lovely to meet you and your initials, if not your faces. Speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, friend.